It started like any ordinary morning. The sun peeked over the rooftops, casting a warm glow across the quiet suburban neighborhood. Birds chirped in the distance as residents went about their routines, some walking their dogs, others jogging or sipping coffee on their porches. In one particular house at the end of the cul-de-sac, a man named James was preparing breakfast for his son, Ethan. James was a reserved man, calm, composed, and fiercely protective of his family. He was a federal judge, though few neighbors knew about his position. He preferred to keep his professional life quiet. Ethan, his 12-year-old son, had been blind since birth. Despite his disability, Ethan was remarkably independent, thanks to his loyal guide dog, Bruno. Bruno wasn't just a pet. He was Ethan's eyes, his guardian, and his greatest comfort. The golden retriever was impeccably trained, responding to Ethan's every command with quiet obedience. Whether navigating sidewalks, avoiding obstacles, or guiding Ethan through crowded spaces, Bruno was a lifeline. But not everyone in the neighborhood understood this. One person in particular, Karen, the self-proclaimed queen of the HOA, had long despised Bruno. She was the type of person who treated HOA rules like sacred law, always finding ways to twist policies to control her neighbors. To Karen, Bruno was just another target, and today she had decided to escalate her campaign against the guide dog. Little did Karen know she was about to pick a fight with the wrong family, and the consequences would be severe. Karen's obsession with enforcing HOA rules was notorious in the neighborhood. She was the type to measure grass heights with a ruler, inspect trash can placements, and scold residents for minor violations. But for some reason, her fixation on Bruno became personal. Karen claimed Bruno was a nuisance, barking too loudly, shedding fur on sidewalks, and posing a threat to the neighborhood's peace. None of these accusations were true, and neighbors knew it. Bruno was calm, well-behaved, and adored by the entire block except Karen. Her complaints started small. Passive-aggressive notes about uncontrolled animals left on James's door. Reports to the HOA board claiming Bruno was aggressive. Empty threats to involve animal control. James mostly ignored her. He knew the law. Service dogs were protected under the Americans with Disabilities Act, ADA. Bruno wasn't just a dog. He was essential to Ethan's safety and well-being. But Karen didn't care about the law. She only cared about power. Then one morning, Karen escalated her tactics to an outrageous level. She filed a formal HOA complaint demanding that Bruno be removed from the neighborhood altogether. The dog isn't licensed with the HO, her letter claimed. It's a liability, and I demand the removal of this uncontrolled animal immediately. James calmly responded in writing, reminding her that service animals are legally protected, and Bruno's presence was non-negotiable. But Karen wasn't done. If she couldn't bully James directly, she had one more move up her sleeve, a move that would cross every possible line. It was a quiet Saturday morning when James's peaceful routine was shattered. He was sipping coffee on the porch while Ethan played with Bruno in the yard, the dog never leaving his side. Then came the sound of tires screeching to a halt. A police cruiser rolled up to James's driveway, followed by another 2 squad cars. Officers stepped out, stern-faced and serious. James put down his mug and stood up. Ethan clutched Bruno's harness tightly, sensing the tension. "Can I help you, officers?" James asked, his voice calm but firm. One of the officers, Officer Grant, cleared his throat. "We received a report that this property has an unregistered animal in violation of HOA bylaws," he explained. "We've been instructed to seize the animal." James's eyes narrowed. "Who filed this report?" Before the officer could answer, Karen appeared, smug as ever, arms crossed and grinning like she had just won the lottery. "I told you," she snapped. "That animal's a menace. The HOA doesn't allow unregistered pets, and I've had enough." James felt his pulse quicken. "You can't seize a service dog," he said firmly. "That's a violation of federal law." Officer Grant shook his head, holding up a clipboard. "We're just following instructions from the HOA president." "That's not how this works," James shot back. "This isn't some random pet. Bruno's a trained guide dog for my son." But Karen just sneered. "I warned you," she spat. "You think you're above the rules? We'll see about that." James clenched his fists. "You're making a mistake," he said coldly. Karen's grin widened. "The only mistake was thinking you could ignore me." The officers reached for Bruno's leash. Ethan let out a panicked scream. "No, don't take Bruno," he cried, clutching his dog tightly. James's face hardened. Enough was enough. You're right, Karen, he said, voice low and firm. You really did make a mistake. Karen scoffed. Oh yeah? What you gonna do about it? James's eyes locked with hers. I'm a federal judge. Karen's smug grin vanished in an instant. Her face went pale. And you, James continued, just turned this into a federal violation. The moment James revealed his position as a federal judge, the officers froze. Officer Grant's confident posture wavered, and his partner shifted uncomfortably. Wait, you're a judge? Grant asked, glancing between James and Karen. James didn't break eye contact with Karen. That's right. And you're about to violate the Americans with Disabilities Act by seizing a legally registered service dog. Karen's eyes widened in panic. That's not true, she blurted. The HOA rules clearly state. James cut her off. HOA rules don't override federal law. He stepped forward, pulling out his wallet. Here's my son's service dog registration. He handed the paperwork to Officer Grant, who scanned the document with growing unease. Look, Grant muttered to his partner. This is legitimate. ADA-certified guide dog. James's voice hardened. If you touch that dog, you're putting yourself and this entire police department at risk of a federal lawsuit. Karen's face twisted with rage. He's bluffing, she spat. He's just trying to scare you. But Officer Grant wasn't buying it. He stepped back from Bruno, motioning for his partner to do the same. I think we've been misled, Grant muttered. We're not seizing this dog. Karen's voice shot up in pitch. You can't just back down. I pay HOA dues, and I know the rules. Officer Grant turned to her with a sharp glare. Ma'am, you're the one giving us false information. If you keep pushing this, you could be facing criminal charges for filing a false police report. Karen's mouth opened and closed, her arrogance draining into panic. You're lucky I'm not pressing charges, James added coldly. But this isn't over. He turned to Ethan, who was still holding Bruno tightly. Go inside, buddy, James said gently. Everything's fine now. Karen stood frozen on the sidewalk, speechless. She wasn't ready for what was coming next. The moment Ethan and Bruno were safely inside, James turned back to Karen, his calm demeanor now replaced with icy resolve. You've crossed the line, he said. I've seen power-hungry HOA presidents before, but you've endangered my son's safety. Karen scoffed. I was just following the rules. You're not following anything, James snapped. You're abusing your authority. That night, James stayed up preparing a formal complaint. He outlined every HOA violation, ADA infraction, and unethical action Karen had taken, including her attempt to manipulate the police. The next morning, Karen found herself personally served with a cease and desist letter. But that wasn't all. James had also filed an injunction against the HOA itself, holding their enforcement power until the case could be reviewed in court. The HOA board was blindsided. At the emergency meeting James attended, he stood confidently at the front of the room, addressing the members. Your HOA president, James announced, gesturing to Karen, has knowingly violated federal law and endangered a blind child. Unless this behavior stops, I'll ensure this entire HOA faces the consequences. Karen's face was red with fury. You can't do that, she shrieked. James leaned in slightly, his tone calm yet firm. I can, and I will. The room went silent. One board member, clearly embarrassed, stood up. We had no idea this was happening, he admitted. We'll hold an internal vote immediately. By the end of the meeting, Karen had been stripped of her position as HOA president, and James's lawsuit against the HOA was swiftly settled. But James wasn't done yet. Despite being removed as HOA president, Karen wasn't finished stirring up trouble. In a final act of defiance, she sent James a letter claiming that Bruno, Ethan's guide dog, was still unwelcome in the neighborhood. You can't keep that filthy animal around, the letter read. If you refuse to comply, I'll personally take this to court. James shook his head in disbelief. Karen wasn't just stubborn, she was delusional. But James knew exactly how to respond. He invited a local news station to cover the story. That evening, the segment aired. A blind boy's guide dog nearly seized by an overzealous HOA president, unaware that the child's father is a federal judge. The story ignited public outrage. Neighbors who had quietly tolerated Karen's tyranny now turned against her. The local community came together to support James and Ethan. Karen's attempt to control the situation backfired spectacularly. The very next day, HOA board members, still feeling the heat from the lawsuit, sent out a letter declaring that all service animals were welcome and that Bruno's presence was fully protected by law. Karen's defiance had not only failed, it had ensured that no one else in the community would ever face discrimination like this again. But Karen's problems were far from over. The fallout from Karen's actions didn't stop with public embarrassment. After her attempt to evict Bruno from the neighborhood went viral, local authorities took notice. James, being a federal judge, knew precisely how to handle the situation, and he wasn't about to let Karen walk away unscathed. He filed a formal complaint with the Fair Housing Office, citing Karen's repeated discrimination against his disabled son. Under the Americans with Disabilities Act, ADA, and Fair Housing Act, Karen's actions were not only unethical, they were illegal. The investigation moved quickly. Neighbors were interviewed, the fabricated HOA rules were exposed, and Karen's endless pattern of harassment was documented in detail. Within weeks, Karen was served with an official notice. She was being charged with violating disability rights laws and harassment of a minor. At the hearing, Karen tried to play the victim. She claimed she was just following the rules and had no idea Bruno was a guide dog. But James had receipts, emails, letters, and recorded conversations where Karen had openly targeted his family. The judge, unimpressed with Karen's excuses, delivered the verdict. Karen was fined $15,000 for harassment and ordered to perform 200 hours of community service, ironically, at the local animal shelter that James had helped fund. Seeing Karen's face when she realized she'd be spending months cleaning dog kennels was a moment James would never forget. But Karen's problems weren't over yet. Karen's downfall didn't just end in court. Her reputation within the community took a massive hit. Word spread like wildfire about her attempt to have a blind child's guide dog seized. Neighbors who had once tolerated her petty behavior now saw her as a pariah. At the next HOA meeting, residents gathered in record numbers. Tension filled the room as Karen tried to defend herself, claiming she was simply upholding community standards. But one by one, neighbors stood up to speak. Linda, an elderly widow, described how Karen had once threatened her with fines over a garden gnome. Paul, a disabled veteran, recalled Karen harassing him for parking in a designated handicap spot. Mr. Jenkins, who had lived in the neighborhood for over 30 years, openly called Karen a bully. The final blow came when James took the floor. Calmly and confidently, he explained Karen's vendetta against his son, her abuse of HOA rules, and how her lies had nearly cost Bruno his only lifeline. By the time James finished speaking, the room erupted in applause. The HOA board voted unanimously to remove Karen from her position as HOA president. As Karen stormed out of the meeting, her face red with embarrassment, a neighbor muttered loud enough for her to hear, "Looks like the queen just lost her crown." But Karen's troubles weren't over yet. Karen's attempt to manipulate the police had backfired, but things were about to get worse for her. A week after the HOA meeting, a letter from the county court arrived at Karen's doorstep. James had decided to press charges for harassment, false claims, and emotional distress inflicted on his son. Karen scoffed at the letter, dismissing it as a scare tactic. "He can't win," she muttered to herself. But Karen underestimated the gravity of the situation. When the court date arrived, Karen was met with a harsh reality. James' attorney presented security footage from their doorbell camera, video evidence that clearly showed Karen threatening James' family and demanding they get rid of that mutt. The footage showed Karen pushing the false narrative that Bruno was a dangerous animal. Worse still, the officers who responded to Karen's bogus police call testified against her in court. They described her behavior as aggressive, manipulative, and dishonest. The judge, visibly unimpressed, ruled in favor of James. Karen was ordered to white heavy checkmark pay a $10,000 fine for harassment and false reporting. White heavy checkmark compensate James for emotional distress. White heavy checkmark issue a formal written apology to James' family. But the biggest blow came when the judge warned Karen, "If you continue to abuse your position or target vulnerable members of this community, I will personally see to it that your name is added to the county's public nuisance list." Karen's face turned pale. That list would label her as a habitual troublemaker, something that could haunt her for years. Humiliated and defeated, Karen had no choice but to pay the fines, apologize, and retreat from her position of power. But what she didn't know was that James wasn't done yet.